I was halfway through my meatloaf when my own son looked me dead in the eye and said, "Dad, you're basically a guest here." The fork froze halfway to my mouth. Guest. In the house, I'd put the down payment on. In the dining room, I'd helped paint last summer when Melissa decided sage green was more modern. Snow was falling thick outside the window, coating the street in Springfield, Missouri in a soft white blanket. Inside, the air felt sharp and thin, like the heat had been turned down a notch without warning. I'm Walter Hayes, 67, widowed 10 years, spent 40 years fixing industrial engines, the kind of work that leaves your hands rough no matter how much lotion you use. I raised Brad alone after his mom passed, worked overtime shifts to cover his tuition at the University of Tulsa, $90,000 so he could have the future mom wanted, paid for his Ford F-150 in cash when his old beater gave out. 2 years ago, I pulled $80,000 from my retirement account to help Brad and Melissa buy this house in a decent neighborhood. I thought it was what fathers did. Melissa's voice cut in before I could respond. We just think it's fair you contribute more to the bills. Groceries are expensive. Utilities are up. If you're going to stay here long term, we all need to pitch in. I swallowed hard. Melissa, I've been covering the internet, water, and gas since you moved in. You know that. Brad leaned back in his chair. That smirk of his I used to think was charming when he was a teenager now just looked smug. That's not the same as helping with the mortgage. You're not paying rent, you're just here. The word stuck like a bone in my throat. Not paying rent in a house they couldn't have bought without me. Melissa's eyes flicked to the small oak cabinet in the corner. We were talking, she said lightly, and maybe you could think about selling those old pocket watches. They're just sitting there. Could help with the bills. My hand tightened around my fork. Those watches weren't just old metal. They were my grandfather's, each one a piece of family history. I'd been planning to give them to Brad someday. Those are staying where they are, I said. The room went quiet, except for the clink of Melissa setting her glass down. Brad's jaw tightened. Look, Dad, we can make this easy or hard. Help with the mortgage every month, or... He shrugged, letting the sentence dangle. Or what? I asked, my voice steady. He looked right at me. Or you start looking for somewhere else to live. I glanced between the two of them, reading the unspoken agreement in their faces. They'd talked about this, maybe for weeks, maybe longer. I pushed my chair back slowly. All right, I said, keeping my tone even. Melissa smiled a little too quickly, like she thought I'd agreed to their terms. Good, I'll start looking, I said, standing up. Brad blinked. Wait, that's not what... But I was already walking toward my room, the old floorboards creaking under my boots. Behind the closed door, I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the muffled sound of their voices in the dining room. They thought they'd won some kind of battle tonight. I reached under the bed and pulled out the small fireproof box I keep there. Inside was the deed to the house, paid in full last spring. My name alone on the line, where it mattered. Brad and Melissa didn't know that. They thought the bank still had a claim, thought I was just some harmless old man coasting on their generosity. I ran my fingers over the raised seal, felt the paper's weight. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering everything in a clean white sheet. But under it, the ground was hard, frozen, unyielding. 30 days. That's how much time I'd give them to figure out what it meant to call me a guest in my own home. When I opened my door, Brad was standing at the end of the hall. We'll talk more tomorrow, he said. I smiled, the kind of smile that made him hesitate for half a second. Oh, we will, I said. And in that moment, I think he knew. Something had shifted. Tomorrow, I'd start putting things in motion. And once it started, there'd be no stopping it. The next morning, the snow was still falling, a thin crust of ice on the Impala's windshield. I let the engine idle, the heater hissing warm air into the cabin, and stared at the house through the frost. Brad's truck was gone. Melissa's sedan sat in the driveway under a fresh dusting of white. For a moment, I wondered if they were inside talking about last night, maybe realizing how far they'd crossed the line. Then I remembered the smirk on Brad's face and knew better. My first stop was the bank. The lobby smelled like polished wood and coffee, same as it had for decades. Mary at the counter has known me since the days I'd deposit my overtime checks in person. I slid my ID across the desk. I need to cancel every automatic payment coming from my account that isn't directly mine. She started tapping keys. Walter, that includes the utilities and all of them, I said. My voice didn't waver. Half an hour later, the lifelines were severed. Mortgage payments, electric, gas, internet, even the Costco membership tied to my card. My pulse slowed with each confirmation slip she printed. The insurance office was next. A young man in a pressed shirt asked if I was sure about removing 2 vehicles from my policy. Brad's truck, Melissa's sedan. They don't belong to me, I said. He hesitated. Well, I see here they're both registered at your address. That caught my attention. Check the mailing address on their credit applications. He frowned at the screen. Same as yours. I left with a folder under my arm, the cold air biting my face as I walked to the car. They'd been using my name and address for years as a safety net, a built-in guarantor for anything they wanted to buy. Halfway to the diner, I called an old buddy, Rick Coleman, a lawyer I'd known since high school. He answered on the second ring. Rick, how fast can we move on an eviction? There was a pause, then a slow whistle. Walter, you're talking about your own kid. I'm talking about tenants who don't pay rent, don't respect the owner, and think they're entitled to run the place. Rick didn't push back. You got the deed in your name? Paid in full? Then it's simple. 30 days notice. You'll have to be ready for them to fight dirty. I told him about the conversation last night, about Melissa eyeing my grandfather's watches like she was window shopping. That's not dirty, Walt, Rick said. That's foreplay. By lunch, the paperwork was in motion. Rick promised to file before the courthouse closed. Driving back through town, I stopped for gas. The clerk, a young kid with too much gel in his hair, leaned over the counter. Mr. Hayes, you know your son tried to take a second mortgage out on your place last month? The words made my stomach drop. What? Yeah. My uncle works at the credit union. Said the application looked fishy. Didn't match the signature on file. Mini twist or not, it fit too neatly with what I'd already learned. Brad hadn't just woken up one day and decided to treat me like a freeloader. He'd been building towards something bigger. I drove home slowly, the sky a heavy gray that promised more snow. Inside, Melissa was on the couch, laptop balanced on her knees. You're back early, she said without looking up. Had errands. Brad came in through the kitchen, smelling faintly of beer and motor oil. You get a job yet? I didn't answer. Just smiled and headed to my room, the folder from the insurance office tucked under my arm. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I laid the folder open on my bed. Every page was proof of how far they'd stretched my goodwill. False addresses, unauthorized charges, debts tied to my name. In my gut, I felt the click of something locking into place. They thought last night was the first move. It wasn't. The real game had just started. And tomorrow, they get the first official letter from the sheriff's department. 2 days after Rick filed the eviction, the whole town seemed to know. Springfield's not big, and news here travels like wildfire, especially when the sheriff's cruiser pulls up to your driveway in broad daylight. I was at the Waffle House that morning, nursing a black coffee, when I heard it. 2 men in the booth behind me were talking low, but in a town this small, you don't have to strain to catch the details. That Hayes boy's in deep, one of them said. How deep? The other asked. Branson Casino. 20 grand, maybe more. Borrowed from folks you don't want to be late paying. I didn't turn around. My hand stayed wrapped around the warm mug. But inside my chest, something shifted. It wasn't just that Brad had debts. It was the way they said it. Like everyone but me already knew. I left a 10 on the table and drove across town to Miller's Garage, where I've taken my cars for 30 years. Tom, the owner, waved me in. Walter, you should hear this. He lowered his voice. One of Brad's creditors came by yesterday asking for you. Said Brad put your house down as collateral on some private loan. The words hit harder than the cold wind outside. Did he sign anything? Tom nodded grimly. Couldn't show me, but he said the paperwork looked official. I drove home slow, my mind chewing on the pieces. The false address, the canceled payments, the smug confidence at dinner. Brad hadn't just been ungrateful. He'd been using me as a human shield against a collapse he saw coming. Melissa's car was gone when I pulled into the driveway. Inside, the house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge. On the counter sat a pile of unopened mail. I flipped through it without thinking. Bill notices, junk ads, a thick envelope from the county recorder's office. I slid it open with my thumb. Inside was a photocopy of a deed transfer request. My name was still on the title, but the paperwork tried to show Melissa as a co-owner. The signature next to mine was a clumsy imitation, but the kicker was the notary stamp in the corner. I'd seen that stamp before. It belonged to an old high school classmate, now a notary public who did side work out of her kitchen. I set the papers down, the room tilting slightly under me. This wasn't just desperation. This was coordination. Someone had vouched for that signature, knowing it was fake. I stepped outside, the cold air clearing my head. Across the street, Mrs. Franklin was shoveling her walkway. She looked up and gave a little wave. Walter, I heard about the notice. You doing all right? I almost told her everything right there. Instead, I just said, doing what needs to be done. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the deed copy, the insurance folder, and the eviction paperwork spread in front of me. The house felt different now. Less like a home, more like a crime scene I hadn't known I was living in. Around 9, Brad came in. He smelled faintly of whiskey and cold air. We need to talk, he said, dropping into the chair across from me. I didn't look up. About what? Melissa says you've been making moves behind our backs, canceling stuff, calling lawyers. I closed the folder slowly. I've been protecting what's mine. He laughed once, sharp and bitter. Yours? You wouldn't even have this place if it wasn't for me and Melissa helping you out. That was it. The delusion laid bare. You've got 30 days, I said quietly. He pushed back his chair, the legs scraping the floor. You're making a mistake, old man. I met his eyes. Number I'm correcting one. He left without another word, the front door slamming behind him. I sat there for a long time, listening to the winter wind scrape against the windows. In my gut, I knew something was coming. The kind of retaliation you don't see until it's too late. The next morning, the phone rang before sunrise. It was Rick. Walter, you might want to sit down. Someone tried to pull a title search on your property last night. Same day your eviction notice was served. I felt a slow, cold burn start in my chest. Whoever was helping Brad wasn't just trying to stall. They were trying to take the house outright before the 30 days were up. I looked out the window at the snow-covered street, the sky just beginning to turn gray. This isn't about kicking them out anymore, I said. It's about making sure they never get the chance to do this to anyone else. And in that moment, I knew the next move had to be bigger, sharper, and public. because Brad had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let him walk back over it. The day after Rick's warning, I didn't waste time. By mid-morning, I was at the sheriff's office with a stack of evidence, copies of the fake deed transfer, the insurance files, and the report from Miller's garage about Brad's creditors sniffing around. The deputy flipped through the folder, eyebrows climbing higher with every page. "This isn't just a civil dispute," he said finally. "You're looking at attempted fraud, maybe conspiracy if that notary knowingly signed off." The word conspiracy should have made me angry. Instead, it settled over me like armor. I'd been walking around feeling outnumbered in my own home, but the truth was I'd been sitting on enough leverage to bury them. From there, I drove to the courthouse to meet Rick. He was waiting in the hallway with 2 styrofoam cups of coffee and that cautious smile lawyers get when they know they're about to drop something big. "I pulled the notary's log," he said, handing me a photocopy. "Melissa brought her the paperwork. Brad never even showed up." It hit me in the gut. I'd been so focused on Brad's debts and arrogance that I hadn't considered Melissa might be the architect. The way she'd suggested selling my grandfather's watches. The way she'd always been the one opening the mail. I sat with that for a moment, feeling the cold steel of betrayal slide in deeper. Then I looked up at Rick. "We use it." The rest of the day was a blur of phone calls and signatures. By late afternoon, we'd filed for a restraining order against both Brad and Melissa, citing threats, fraudulent activity, and misuse of my personal information. The clerk told me service would happen within 48 hours, but in this county, that usually meant sooner. Back at the house, the air felt heavy, charged. Melissa was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. She didn't look up when I came in. "Brad's out," she said. "Won't be back till late." I opened the fridge for a bottle of water, my back to her. "You've been busy, too." She stiffened. "What's that supposed to mean?" I turned, holding her gaze. "You took those papers to the notary. You signed my name." Her spoon froze mid-stir. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You do," I said quietly. "And tomorrow, so will the sheriff." She set the spoon down hard enough to splash sauce onto the counter. "You think you can just throw us out? Make us look like criminals in front of everyone?" I walked toward my room, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut. "I don't have to make you look like anything. You did that yourselves." That night I barely slept. Around 2 a.m., headlights swept across my bedroom wall. Then the muffled slam of a car door. I pulled back the curtain just enough to see Brad and Melissa in the driveway, arguing. Brad's hands were moving fast, his shoulders hunched. Melissa was shaking her head, arms crossed. In the morning, Rick called. "They're served. Papers went out first thing." I went into town to pick up groceries, and by the time I came back, their cars were gone. On the front step sat a package, no return address. Inside was a single envelope, my name written in Melissa's looping script. I sat at the kitchen table to open it. The first page was a printed bank statement from an account I'd never seen. The balance was just over $35,000. Below it, a handwritten note. "Brad doesn't know about this. If you want him gone for good, we can make a deal." I stared at it so long the coffee went cold in my mug. Melissa turning on Brad. Not out of guilt, out of survival. It explained too much. The way she'd been distant with him lately. The whispered phone calls when she thought I wasn't listening. She had her own plan, and now she wanted me in on it. I slid the envelope back into the box and carried it to my room. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the leaves. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. This was the twist I hadn't seen coming. My enemy just offered me her hand. The question was, did I take it? Because if I did, the next move wouldn't just end with Brad out of my house. It would ruin him completely. And part of me, the parts still bleeding from that dinner table ultimatum, wanted exactly that. I didn't answer Melissa's deal right away. I let the envelope sit in the top drawer of my nightstand for 2 days, right next to the key to my father's watch case. Every time I opened the drawer, I'd feel the weight of it. Not the paper, but the choice. On the third morning, I called Rick. We met at his office, blinds half closed against the winter glare. I slid the envelope across his desk. He read the note twice, then looked up. "She's offering you a knife to cut his throat. The question is, do you want to hold it?" I didn't answer right away. "If she's hiding 35 grand, where did it come from?" Rick's smile was thin. "If I had to guess, from selling information or moving cash for those same people Brad owes. That means she's not just a witness. She's involved." That night, I invited Melissa to meet me at the Main Street Diner. She showed up in a camel coat, hair perfect, smile tight as piano wire. We slid into the corner booth. "You've read my note," she said. "I have," I said. "And I want to make sure we both get what we deserve out of this." Her eyes narrowed slightly, trying to read between my words. "Meaning?" "Meaning I'll make sure Brad's gone for good. But I want your full cooperation with the sheriff." She hesitated, then nodded. "If it keeps me out of it, fine." I leaned in just enough so she could hear the steel in my voice. "Melissa, you're already in it. The only question is which side of the table you're sitting on when it all comes down." The next week was a quiet storm. Rick coordinated with the sheriff's office and the county prosecutor. Melissa handed over the bank statements, and in return, she was promised a lighter touch if things went legal. What she didn't know was that I'd also given them the notary log, the forged signature, and a sworn statement from the notary herself, who, under pressure, admitted Melissa asked her to stamp it, knowing Brad wasn't present. The sheriff served Brad with a formal charge for attempted property fraud and Melissa for conspiracy to commit fraud. It hit them like a sledgehammer. Brad tried to bluff it off at first, but when the local paper ran the story, complete with the detail about the casino debts, his job at the dealership evaporated overnight. Melissa fared no better. She might have avoided jail with her cooperation, but the plea deal came with a condition: restitution. Every cent she had hidden in that account went straight to legal fees and paying back the fines. The account she'd waved in front of me like a secret weapon ended up funding her own undoing. I signed the final eviction order 2 weeks later. The sheriff's deputy walked me through the house, now stripped bare. The living room smelled like dust and cold air. The only thing left behind was a small, dented box on the kitchen counter. Inside was my grandfather's oldest pocket watch, the one Melissa had once hinted we should sell. I moved into a small craftsman house on the other side of town. It's nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, a sunroom that gets warm in the mornings, and a workshop in the garage where I've started repairing old watches again. Every morning I sit at the workbench, coffee steaming beside me, and I think about how close I came to letting them turn my home into their prize. Here's the truth I carry from it. Sometimes family will stand beside you until you stop being useful to them. And when that happens, you learn the difference between helping someone and enabling them. It's a line I'll never cross again. If you've ever been pushed to that edge, forced to choose between your dignity and keeping the peace, I'd like to hear how you handled it. Share it in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories like this, you know where to find me. I'll be here, coffee in hand, telling it the way it really happened.